Well, my guest on this occasion is Carl Benjamin. He's the founder and co-host of the English political and social commentary podcast, The Lotus Eaters. He has on your YouTube channel, your self-description is simply Englishman. Can I ask what you mean by that simple description, Englishman?
Yeah, it's taken me a long time to get to the understanding that that's the self-description I should use too. Because you'll notice that if you look at a lot of people's sort of Twitter bios and whatnot, they will say, libertarian or socialist, free Palestine. They'll have all of these ideological signifiers. But the ideology is all a kind of window dressing for self-interest. And so actually just being honest about what it is you are to people does away with all of that. And it allows you to actually speak properly about the subjects. Because ideology, being propositional, has definite conclusions that it forces you to come to. And actually, when you say, well, I'm just an Englishman or an Australian or an American or something like that, you are telling people a lot about your cultural background. You're telling people a lot about the things that they can stereotypically expect to know about you. And then you can begin a proper conversation in earnest, rather than engaging in what is essentially a kind of mathematical duel between people who spar with these ideologies, which never ends in the place where people want it to end. Because once one person has one interpretation of the propositions and another person has another interpretation, the only place to go from that is to say, well, the other person is acting in bad faith. The other person is actually a liar. They're actually deceitful because they didn't have the same interpretation as I did. And the thing that is assumed when you have that conversation is an identical perspective of both interlocutor. They assume that both people have the same background, have the same intentions, have the same understanding of the world to interpret the propositions in exactly the same way. And so we see most of online political discussion is just this pure ideology that is all really informed by the identities that's underneath the ideology. And because it's propositional, because it's logical, the actual discourse gets ground down in this, rather than just being normal and talking like a human being, in which we can actually be concerned about one another as people, rather than the accuracy of the ideology that we're spouting. And so I think that's actually a much more human way of having a discussion. It's a much more human way of presenting yourself. And frankly, I think it's just more honest. So that's why I've got that there.
Konstantin Kisin last year opened up an interesting debate. He said that as a man of Russian heritage, he now considers himself as British, but not English, insofar as Englishness is seen as an ethnicity. How do you see that? And why bring ethnicity into Britishness?
Well, I think Konstantin is right there. I think he's correct. So British is specifically a civic identity. And the thing, actually, it's very complex, but British was assumed to encompass the ethnic identities of the British Isles. But after the British Empire and the civic expansion of British citizenship, it has become a civic identity that has become a kind of identifier for people who want to belong to a certain kind of world. For example, you could quite easily say that Australians, Canadians, and New Zealanders are all British. Like it's actually Americans as well in a way. It's actually imprinted completely on your cultures and impossible to deny. I mean, the fact that we can have this conversation in English as your first language, I assume, is proof of actually where you come from, where this has all begun. And so this civic identity has expanded around the world, so it isn't actually useful to merely describe white British people as being merely British, because it's an incorporative identity that is also adopted by many of the immigrants we have now. Because I mean, of course, I'm sure you'll know that before well, in the first half of the 20th century, basically didn't have immigration into Britain. And the immigration into Britain has ramped up to an extreme degree. So the identity of being British has become much more incorporative to give the new people who have come here a way of trying to identify and affiliate with the country. But what this has done is actually taken something away from the native population of the country, because the identity of being British 100 years ago wasn't contested. It wasn't something that people felt didn't apply to them and other people, and therefore rendering the sort of borders of it permeable and therefore making the definition itself not very useful. And so this is why the question of ethnicity, I think, has really risen to the fore, where it's like, well, okay, I'm happy to concede that Constantine is British. You know, he feels he's British, he likes Britain, he wants to affiliate with Britain over anything else. And he's correct when he says he's not English, because, of course, English is an ethnicity, as in you inherit your ethnicity and you can't change it. So he's correct to say that he is not ethnically English. And so what we have here is the civic layer of life, and then what I think is best described as actually the tribal layer of life, because we're not in the West used to thinking of ourselves in terms of tribes, but actually a lot of what we do is a kind of tribal understanding of the world, and we assume that it's universal because everyone around us agrees with these same premises, the same assumptions. But actually, immigration has forced us to understand that these are actually parochial assumptions to Western Europeans, Northwestern Europeans, and in many cases, in particular, the sort of Germanic Protestant assumptions of Northwestern Europe. And then you can be even more specific to some of them are specifically English assumptions rather than being actually like Scottish or Welsh assumptions. So the question of ethnicity has raised to the fore in that way, but also what this has revealed is actually the value sets that groups of people have and adopt and are inculcated into through just long habituation of living in their own cultures. These are things that are particular to them. They're not universal, and they are a kind of tribal expression. And that's also what Constantine, I think, is saying in that. It's not to say that other people can't look at those values and say, oh, I appreciate those values, and I would like to live among other people with those values, which, of course, is what Constantine has done. But it's not something that is separate to the people. These values are an expression of these people. And so you can't just take them away, separate them from the people, and then have them adopted wholesale by another people. This is where ideology becomes actually so pernicious, and is in fact one of the reasons why all of the sort of liberal and post-liberal revolutions of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries are so destructive, because what they are really trying to do, all of liberalism really, is the rest of the world trying to live like Englishmen, and when they apply what they see as the consequences, the sort of exigencies of the English habit of life, when they apply that to their own countries, they realize that the social structures required to uphold that don't exist. And